Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for a real, live ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay, Bahamas. It didn't start off as a ghost town. Disney cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists to relax in luxury. This is a fact. You can look it up yourselves. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. Then they abandoned it. Disney blames this on the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate. And there was even a blame on the cast of workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of our story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and obviously it wasn't because foreigners are lazy. Both are convenient excuses, however. No, I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beach side of Emerald Isle in North California, Disney began the construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character Mowgli, then you might remember the story, The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, then you'd know it's a Disney's cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened and pursued by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was controversial from the undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and that was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned it around and sold properties to Disney. At one point, a home had just been constructed and was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project, knowing full well what was going on. Some people even started calling it Mickey's Highway. Then there was a concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney Co. actually held a city meeting, and they intended to sell everyone on how ludicrous the project was going to be for everyone. When they showed them the concept art, a gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say, everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but a also somewhat xenophobic area in the southern USA. It was a questionable mix from that point of history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do or say about it. The local TV and newspapers were against it from the beginning. But some sort of insane connection between Disney Media's holdings and the local venues came into play, and their opinion turned on a dime. So, anyway, Treasure Island in the Bahamas, Disney sucked those millions and then just split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete, visitors actually stayed at the resort, the surrounding communities floated with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with the influx of irate tourists. Then, it all just stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But, they're pretty happy about it. Disney's losses were pretty hilarious and wonderful to the large group of folk who did not want this in the first place. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it close over a decade ago. I live, maybe 4 hours from Emerald Island, so I really only heard rumblings about it. I did not experience it firsthand. Then, I read this article from someone who explored the Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog about the crazy shit they found there. Stuff just left behind, things smashed, defaced, and probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking the place. People there just felt angry about the Treasure Island as folk did here about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, There were rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock, quote unquote, into the local waters when it closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, I'm getting at this blog about the Treasure Island, and it's got me thinking. Even though many years have passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace and take some photos and write about my experience and probably see if there was anything I could take as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time getting there, because honestly it took me about another year after I first found that Treasure Island article to get up going to Emerald Isle. After the course of a year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort. Or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place that had been, well, at least that hadn't been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word to say about the place, though that was to be expected since they already had swung Disney's way anyway. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment, you know. I recently learned that the corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke out against the resort, but rather their words are made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an odd-as-hell map I received back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World, and I guess being there in the late 80s was considered quote-unquote recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved with my books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin it was shoved into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, as most transplants who just moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures, the second I managed to say, "Where can I find Mowgli's?" The drive took me through the incredibly long corridor of overgrowth tropical plants that had been rampant and overpopulated in the area mixed with the native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous, monolithic wooden gates whose supports on either side look like they've been cut from giant seagulls. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging onto the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap, with hand-painted letters scrawled in black. Abandoned by Disney. Clearly, the handiwork of a past local or an employee who wanted to make a small protest. The gates opened enough to walk through, but not drive, so grabbing my digital camera and map, whose flip side showed me the layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place was just as overgrown as the entryway. A palm tree stood unattended with ragged piles of its own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking, bug-riddled refuse. There was a sort of clash between order and chaos, as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking, blackened mushrooms remained. All that remained of any outdoor structure, however, were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. What was most likely an informational booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris chopped up by vandalism and ravaged by weather. The interesting thing on the grounds was the statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave towards no one, staring into an empty space with a silly, toothy grin as bird shit covered the swaths of his fur, and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building was covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't been peeled or chipped away. The front doors weren't open. In fact, they'd been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the doors, or the gaping maw where they had been, someone had yet again painted, "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I found inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged society of homeless bums. But no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare, I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting in this empty echo chamber that was amplified by my every step like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen was, as you imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances and space. No expenses spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door kicked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place even smelled like very, very old piss. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, possibly for hanging cuts of meat. As I stood inside there for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung with a random direction, but their movements were slow and small, that it was almost impossible to see. I figured that had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging, clutching it in my fist, then carefully letting it go, but within seconds it started swinging once more. The bathrooms were in the very much of the same state as the rest of the place, just like the Treasure Island Resort. Someone had methodically smashed every porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There was about half an inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay very long. What's odd is that the toilets and the sinks and the bidets in the ladies' room, yes, I went there, all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me that they should have shut off the water long ago. There was plenty of rooms in the resorts, but naturally I didn't have time to look through all of them. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything in there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in one room, as I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out of one of them. Though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing echoing the silence, or just another case of sound flowing off of the water playing tricks on the mind. This is what it sounded like. Person 1. I don't believe it. From person 2, there was a short, unknown reply. Back to person 1. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Back to person 2. Your father told you. Back to person 1. A unknown reply, or possibly just weeping. I know that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced and why I thought there might have been something running up in that room, or worse, some vigilance who'd been holed up there who would have probably knifed me. At the front doors of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note and had wasted a trip up. As I looked at the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard I apparently had missed. Something that would give me at least one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There, as a lifelike statue of a python, might have been 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal to the right of the center area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell on the object in a perfect way for a photograph. So I approached the python and snapped a photo. Then I stood on my toes and snapped another, and moved closer again to get the detail on his face. Slowly, but casually, the python lifted his head and looked directly into my eyes, and turned and slithered off the pedestal across the grass into the trees. All 80 feet of it. Its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail left the sunning spot. Disney had released other exotic animals onto the ground. Right there on my floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I read all about the sharks at Treasure Island, and I should have known they would have done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been and back towards the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. It took a few deep breaths and slaps on my own face to get myself right in the head again after that. I looked a place for to sit down, as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless if I wanted to recline on some broken glass and a dead leaf carpet, or haul myself up onto the desk, which had a questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs near the palace lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for the startling amount of accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with the "Abandoned by Disney" motto I became so accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward to a below-ground level. Using my camera flash as some sort of improvised flashlight, I could see the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock sign. A sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit, for two reasons. One, the mascots only area would have been definitely held some interesting stuff back in the day. Two, the padlock was still in its place. No one's gone down there, not vandals, not looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore, and perhaps find something interesting to photograph, or warranty a steal. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself with the fact that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, well, hey, abandoned, right? It didn't take much to bust the lock on the wall. Well, actually, that's wrong. It didn't take much to burst the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate with enough force to pull the screws out of the wall. Something nobody else had apparently thought of, or had been able to do at the time. The mascots only area was startling, but a very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light was overheated, and was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen, broken, even if age and exposure had definitely taken its toll. Tables had notepads and pens. There were clocks, and even a punch-in clock on the wall, complete with filled-out time cards. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old static-filled television, and a long rotted-out food and drink on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything was left in a state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascot-only area, the sights became more interesting as I went further. Desks and tables were knocked over, papers scattered, almost melted into the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real, rotting, crimson floor coverings. Everything was sort of squishy. Anything wood degenerated into a mush when I applied even the littlest amount of force, and clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms simply fell into moist threads if I tried to unhook them. The one thing that annoyed me was that light that became more and more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dark, scoffing depths of the palace. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words, "Character Prep 1" stenciled on it. The door wouldn't even open at first. I figured that this was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of the twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, however, the angle or trick I tried at first did not work. The door wouldn't budge. It just simply wouldn't give in. That's until I gave up and started to walk away. That's when there was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open slowly. Inside, the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch in the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed life, flickering and fading out like the rest I passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, but it just seemed like the light was just going to keep on getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought it would reach a critical stage, the light dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly as I pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on walls, fully put together like a strange cartoon cadaver, which hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers towards the back. What I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was the Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was laying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur of the costume was rotten and shredding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey. Black where the white should be, and white where the black should be. His normally red overalls were also only light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing until the last. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls. Upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show the entire row of frozen, putrid, cartoon faces, some plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot, just one of the bedraggled character heads on a slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of the Donald Duck costume and carefully moved it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud, cluttering sound made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot's head and shattered into pieces at my feet. The only empty face and lower jaw remained staring up at me. I dropped the Donald Duck head immediately, and as you expect, I moved away for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had a picture of it, you know. I had, for a number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you don't think through. I needed proof of what happened, especially Disney was just going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind right from the start that even if this was gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when the Mickey, that photo-negative opposite of Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. Reverse Mickey. Sado Freedomist. Added by a Sado Freedomist. First sitting up, then climbing onto his feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside of it, stood in the center of the room. It's just a fake face staring at me as I mumbled, No. Over and over and over again with shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that once again turned into jelly, and managed to lift the camera to aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera screen displayed only dead pictures in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey Mouse costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, mirroring the screen where Mickey's outline moved to. Then, the camera died and went blank and quiet. Broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume. Hey! It said in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. Wanna see my head come off? It started to pull its own head off, working its clumsily gloved fingers around its neck with a clawing, impatient movement similar to the wounded man trying to pull himself free of the predator's jaws. It worked its digits into its neck. So much blood. So much thick, chunky yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. Only cared about getting away. Above the doorway out of the room, I saw one final message, clawed with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of my camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it again after I ran from that place. I fled for my sanity, not my very life. I knew Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anything like that getting out.